Welcome to a day in the life of St. Paul. Today's reading from Acts 14, verses 5 through 18, gives some insight into what a day in his life might have looked like. Last week, we saw Paul and Barnabas on the first leg of their missionary journey in Antioch of Pisidia. And from there, they went to Iconium, a city about 2 to 3 days' journey southeast of Antioch. And then once again, Paul goes into the synagogue and begins preaching, and a number of Jews and Gentiles begin to believe. However, those who are opposed to him mount an opposition, and as we come to the beginning of today's reading, we find out that they're trying to kill Paul and Barnabas. So Paul and Barnabas continue their journey to the towns of Lystra and Derbe. When they get to Lystra, Paul heals a man that had been lame from birth, and it created such an uproar that the people of Lystra thought that the gods had come down to them. They thought that Barnabas was Zeus and Paul was Hermes, and so they begin getting ready to offer a sacrifice for them. But when Paul and Barnabas realize that they're going to sacrifice to them as if they were gods, then they try to stop them and try to remind them that they're just people like everybody else. Verse 18 says this, it says, "Even with these words, they scarcely restrained the crowds from offering sacrifice to them." But I want to back up for a moment and look at verse 15, at what Paul says when he realizes they're going to sacrifice to them as gods. He says this, "Men, why are you doing this? We are of the same nature as you, human beings." Did you hear that? We're of the same nature as you, human beings. And I think that we have a tendency to forget this. We all know that the saints are people just like us, but sometimes we don't respond that way. When we think of the great saints like Paul or Francis or Augustine or Teresa or any other wonderful saints, we think of them as being somehow different from us. We think to ourselves, I could never be as holy as they are. But we forget that they were just like us, and they were what they were because of God's grace. The saints aren't like some kind of demigod or even superhero, that they have abilities that we could never have. Because if that was true, if they had these abilities that we would never be able to get, then all we could do is admire them, honor them, and maybe even pray to them. But that's not how it is. The truth is that the saints were people just like us. And the difference is that they cooperated with the grace that God was giving them. Do we? The grace of God is available to everyone. And when we recognize that, and we receive it and cooperate with it, then we're well on our way to sainthood. However, if we put the brakes on and decide, oh, that's a little too far, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that, then the whole process gets sidetracked. Normally what happens is that we face some aspect of holiness and we become uncomfortable or even scared. We run away from what God wants to do in our lives. And that's why so many cannot picture themselves as being saints. But here's the problem. Only saints go to heaven. If we want to go to heaven, we have to be saints. And if we're saying, whether by our actions or by our words, if we're saying, I don't want to be a saint, then what we're really saying is, I don't want to go to heaven. And that's a problem. Sainthood is a bit of a taste of heaven here on earth. So there is a sense in which the saints are like spiritual superheroes, but it's not because they're innately so. It's because God gives them the grace for it to happen. And the same is true of us. Every single one of us can be saints, just like the saints that we hear about. Who's your favorite saint? Take some time to ask yourself, am I as holy as that person? If you are, great, rejoice, because it's God's grace that makes it so. But if not, then ask God for the grace so that you can become a saint. St. Paul said that we are people of a nature just like you. But the question for us is, are we people of a nature like them?